Hello, I'm Kalyani Vallath. I'm going to talk to you about TS Eliot today. Some of my students were asking me to explain some of the concepts of TS Eliot, so I thought I'll make a video out of it. As you know, T.S. Eliot was one of the most important modernist poets and critics of the 20th century. This is T.S. Eliot, and he revolutionized literary studies with the publication of The Wasteland. The Wasteland marked the beginning of modernism in literature. Already from the 1890s onwards, the period of decadence and fin de siècle, modernism was in the offing. The old world order had completely changed. That whatever ideas and lifestyle, whatever ideologies existed from the Renaissance period had completely changed as a result of the Industrial Revolution, as a result of the changes that happened in the end of the 19th century, invention of new technologies, in the beginning of the 20th century, the World War. As a result of all this, the Western society in the 20th century experienced a fragmentation, a dissociation from its roots. And modernism was a lament about these changes. It was an attempt to revive the lost centers, the lost meanings, and to forge a tradition that the writers of the time could fall back on. It was an attempt to revive the society as it existed before the advent of the Industrial Revolution and technology. So, the major concepts of T.S. Eliot that I'm going to discuss here are all pertaining to this movement called modernism, the concept of tradition to start with. And then I'll go on to talk about impersonality and connect it to unification of sensibility and objective correlative. Eliot's concept of tradition is deeply connected with his understanding of what coexisted at that time called new criticism. The new critics who centered on Cambridge and later took up their name new criticism in America believed in a tradition that existed from the time of Homer and continued up to the present time. Eliot, in the essay, 1919 essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, talks about the concept of tradition with its roots in new criticism. Tradition is a continuum. It continues down the ages. Each individual writer takes his role within tradition, changes it, but carries forward the values of tradition through his or her works. Tradition is something that you consciously choose. You have to know which past authors are important for you, and you have to learn from them through painstaking study. You become part of that tradition. As an understanding of tradition, along with the understanding of tradition, you also need to know about what is the theory of impersonality that Eliot advocated. The individual writer should not express his personality and emotions in the text. The individual writer should stand objectively away from the text without expressing his emotions too much. Expression of emotions, as you know, is romantic. Modernism is in spirit classical. So, the impersonality theory of Eliot advocates that the poet should stand apart from the text, do not put himself into the text too much. Even in Romanticism, this element had already come into being. This element of impersonality was already there a little bit in the theories of John Keats, for example. John Keats believed in negative capability and egotistical sublime. He talked about egotistical sublime and negative capability. Negative capability is the capacity, the negative capacity of the author to be in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without an irritable reaching after fact and reason. That means the poet should not try to solve everything within the text. He should not to rationally tie up all the loose ends of the text. The poet should try to leave some of the questions unanswered. Do not try to impose reason upon the text. Do not let his voice be heard throughout the text. In such a text, there will be polyphony, where the voices of the characters are also heard. So the poet's personality should not dominate over the text. This is very important in John Keats, and it leads to the concept of polyphony in Bakhtin. And you can see reverberations of the same in the same idea in the theory of impersonality of T.S. Eliot. Next, what is unification of sensibility? It is something that all of us are very familiar with. The unification of the head and the heart, the unification of thought and feeling. Obviously, when thought and feeling are not dissociated or separated, when thought and feeling are unified, obviously there won't be fragmentation. As you might know, Eliot was talking about dissociation of sensibility and unification of sensibility in his essay, The Metaphysical Poets. In the essay on metaphysical poets, he says that Donne and his poetry has unified sensibility. The poetry of Donne, in the poetry of Donne, the ideas and the emotions coexist. And in the later 17th century, a dissociation of sensibility set in, from which the modernists have never recovered. Even the modernists have not recovered. The problem of fragmentation in modernism is a problem of dissociation of sensibility. So, by talking about Donne and his unification of sensibility, Eliot is trying to solve the problem of fragmentation in modernism. Modernism is deeply rooted in an idea of unity, an idea of condensation. Different elements should condense into one, unify into one. This idea of condensation or unification is deeply related to the next concept that I'm going to talk to you about, which is objective correlative. Objective correlative is a term coined by the American painter Washington Allston. And objective correlative is also something that you're familiar with. Objective correlative is a symbol or an idea that stands in for a particular emotion. Instead of expressing an emotion, instead of talking about an emotion in words, you have to express it in terms of symbols or images or a set of objects. In mainstream movies, for example, the movies of the 1990s particularly, you will find the overuse of objective correlatives. For example, somebody has died. Instead of depicting tears and crying and lamenting, they will use a symbol like a bird has flown out of its cage. There is rain. Rain depicts sorrow. Images that evoke emotions in you. Images that stand in for a particular emotion. When used sparsely, it is very good. But the problem is, in the movies and all, we have seen it overused. There has been so much of such usage of objective correlatives that it became a little stale. Objective correlative is therefore a set of objects or a chain of events or a symbol or a set of symbols that stand in for a particular emotion, that when these objects or symbols are shown, the emotion is evoked. I always think in this context of one experience I had in my childhood. My parents were movie buffs, and they used to watch a lot of parallel movies and very art films, very high standard movies, in fact. And as a little child, I would not understand some of the scenes and why. Sometimes my mother is very emotional and she would sit and cry watching some scene. I remember very clearly, one day I saw my mother crying, watching a movie, crying, and I told her, I asked her, what happened? Why are you crying? Tell me. And I looked at the TV screen, I could see only rain or something simple as that. And my mother said, when you grow up, you'll understand. I did understand. When I grew up, I understood this is an objective correlative. And when it was presented, the image was presented on screen, the emotion was evoked in my mother. So all the ideas of T.S. Eliot, if you notice, are about unification, are about bringing a lot of things into one. There is another related modernist idea, epiphany. It is not majorly used by T.S. Eliot, but it is a literary device that drew from the Bible. And you can see a lot of epiphanies in the works of James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, for example. That is something normal that happens in daily life, a very ordinary thing that happens in daily life, but suddenly it will have some significance to you. You will get some idea, some problem will get resolved, some thought, will suddenly strike when that ordinary thing happens. That is called an epiphanic moment. For instance, in James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, there are many epiphanic moments. One famous moment is when he's in a dilemma whether I should be, Stephen Dedalus, the protagonist, is in a dilemma whether he should be a clergyman, whether he should leave this life of physicality, this ordinary bourgeois life, and become a clergyman and live in a monastery praying all his life. He's confused about it because one of his professors had just talked to him about the advantages of being a clergyman. And then he took a walk along the by lanes of the village, of the town, and suddenly the smell of rotten cabbages struck him. If you have experienced the smell of rotten cabbages, you'll know it is a horrible smell. It's a very powerful smell. And this smell strikes him, the smell of rottenness. And he stands there and realizes, it's an epiphanic moment for him. He realizes, wow, this is the smell I want. This is the smell of life. This physicality I want. I don't want the musty smell of closed doors of the monasteries. And he suddenly realizes that he does not want to be a clergyman. Eventually in the novel, if you know, he abrogates or rejects this religion altogether. He rejects his family ties, religious ties, national ties, and he leaves Ireland and goes to Paris. That was autobiographical. James Joyce also did that. So I mentioned epiphany now to show that all the ideas in modernism are basically about unification, bringing different experiences together, different meanings together into one. This unification is the main what can I say, objective of the modernist artist and the critic. The modernist gave importance to canons because the canons bring together a lot of ideas that existed in human life and human history. And within the canon, you can find the values of humanity, the perennial, enduring values of humanity. So the aim of the modernist was to condense, to unify, to form centers in this fragmented world where there are no longer any centers. I will conclude this little discussion with a quotation from T.S. Eliot himself. T.S. Eliot in a review of Ulysses, James Joyce's Ulysses, famously said that the modernist artist should try to bring a shape and a significance to this immense panorama of futility and anarchy that is contemporary history. How will the modernist writer do that? By using the mythical method. The modernist writer should use myth as a method. He should, like James Joyce is using in Ulysses, like Eliot used in The Wasteland. So the modernist artist should use the mythical method to bring a shape and a significance to this immense panorama of futility and anarchy. The whole Western world is lying in front of them in futility and anarchy, completely broken up in fragments, in shards, a heap of broken images, to use an expression regarding The Wasteland. Because of the war, because of the disconcerting, upsetting experiences of technology, of world international changes, of world changes, because of all that, the contemporary history of Europe has become an immense panorama of futility and anarchy. To resolve that problem of fragmentation and anarchy, the modernist writer should employ the mythical method. So the mythical method is also another way of unifying, of bringing meaning, of forming centers. That is the very spirit of modernism. Thank you very much.